Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Sheri Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on May 5th, 2023 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. And from there you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show, or you can search the archived listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. The show drops every Friday now at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern, so you can listen then or basically any time after. And while you're on the site, you'll also see above the most recently posted show a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our sun sign, needs to be happy. And this is based on an interview I did with Stephen a couple of years ago, and he's given me permission to distribute it more widely as a means of helping to promote the validity of astrology in our lives. And yes, it will sign you up for my weekly Conversations About Consciousness astrology newsletter, but you can, of course, unsubscribe anytime. So be sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, whether you do so live or after the fact, and enjoy some words of astrological wisdom. And separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page, Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can keep track of upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. And I post now as well on Instagram under karmic.evolution, so feel free to follow me there as well. Finally, I'm offering my discounted 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to listeners only for $125. So if you're interested in astrology and want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, and you'd like help moving from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back from achieving your most cherished desires in the areas of greatest interest to you, perhaps your relationships, your job, your career, your finances, your health, then this is the reading for you. We will look at how the energies into which your soul entered this lifetime may be keeping you stuck now in old habitual patterns or conditioned behavior, and how learning this can assist you to make different, more positive choices moving forward. So if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, that's easy when you take advantage of this special discounted offer at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. As I always like to say, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, now let's get into this week's astro news you can use. The Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse will have just occurred at 10:34 a.m. Pacific time and 1:34 p.m. Eastern time at 14 degrees and 48 minutes of Scorpio by the time this podcast drops on May 5th. As I noted last week, the Scorpio moon opposes the Taurus sun, Uranus, and Mercury retrograde as part of this lunar eclipse's aspects. In short, we may suddenly learn about issues relating to older, already existing ones that have recently come under closer review. What's interesting to note first is that this current lunar eclipse sensitizes the 14 degree and 48 minute Scorpio degree, which was reached by the transiting south node back on September 10th of 2022. And that means that whatever began around then came to a culmination, a resolution, or was revealed after having previously been eclipsed or hidden at the November 8th lunar eclipse, when it perfected. So let's review for a minute. The November 8th Taurus full moon lunar eclipse had the Taurus moon, Uranus, and North Node opposed to the Scorpio sun, Mercury, Venus, and of course the South Node. It seems clear in retrospect that this highlighted the imbalance of power between the current powers that be, read Scorpio sun, Mercury, and Venus, and those representative of the feminine divine, Taurus moon, and Uranus, which has been, transiting Taurus since 2018. So Uranus's alignment with the Taurus moon at that time indicated that Scorpio resistance to change in the power structure would not stand. And I'll remind everyone again that the moon in mundane astrology represents, quote-unquote, the people. So now we might remember that the U.S. Supreme Court Dobbs decision doing away with Roe versus Wade's constitutional right to bodily autonomy for all female U.S. citizens by the spring of 2022 had a lot to do with driving people, especially women, to the polls to vote against anti-abortion conservative legislative representatives then. And most of us will recall, too, that the widely anticipated red wave never materialized, much to the shock and dismay of those on the right. So surprise abounded that polls turned out to be inaccurate and that the Democrats were able to hold their majority in the Senate. Of course, this was followed shortly after by Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema's defection from the Democratic Party to become an independent, but the Democrats held the Senate regardless, even if only by a one-vote margin. At the same time, of course, the House fell under GOP control, but not by the huge majority they had expected. And this led also to the brouhaha over the vote to seat Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker in early 2023, which resulted in his placating those furthest to the right, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, and others in the House, Lauren Boebert, and there's a whole bunch of them, in order to win that distinction after a 15th vote finally succeeded in his favor. So all in all, when we look back now, we're able to say that this November 8th, 2022 Taurus full moon lunar eclipse helped shift the balance of power back toward honoring feminine divine archetypal energy as it relates to justice in terms of natural law, rather than farther away from it through adherence to man-made laws constructed by the patriarchal powers that be. So back now to today's solar eclipse degree, that 1448 Scorpio degree, and the fact that this degree actually opposes the 16 degree 1 minute Taurus full moon lunar eclipse degree from November 8th of 2022. And it does so by only a little over 1 degree. Now, I believe there's significant resonance in this May 5th Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse's opposition by degree to the November 8th Taurus full moon lunar eclipse degree, and that this resonance lies with the presence of Uranus as a major factor of sudden surprise in both eclipses. Now, thus far, and I have to be honest, I am recording this on May 4th for distribution on May 5th. So far we've heard already, as this eclipse is waxing, the verdict in the Proud Boys trial. 4 Proud Boys convicted of sedition in key January 6 case, according to the New York Times headline, which then wrote, and here I quote, 4 members of the Proud Boys, including their former leader Enrico Tarrio, were convicted on Thursday of seditious conspiracy for plotting to keep President Donald J. Trump in power after his election defeat by leading a violent mob and attacking the Capitol on January 6, 2021. The verdict was a blow against the far-right group and another milestone in the Justice Department's prosecution of the pro-Trump rioters who stormed the Capitol. The jurors in the case failed to reach a decision on the sedition charge for one of the defendants, Dominic Pezzola, although he was convicted of other serious felonies. Quote, that's the end quote. And I'm saying, we might remember that Dominic Pezzola was the guy who was photographed with his feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk in the Capitol on January 6th. And I believe he left her a note. I'm trying to remember if it was a threatening note or not, but, on his way out or whatever. But the Times continues, and I quote again, the verdicts coming after 7 days of deliberations in federal district court in Washington were a major blow against one of the country's most notorious far-right groups and another milestone in the Justice Department's vast investigation of the Capitol attack. The trial was the last of 3 sedition cases that federal prosecutors brought against key figures in the Capitol attack. End quote. And one former DOJ prosecutor labeled the verdict this way, and here I quote, again, this is a huge win for DOJ after a long, messy trial that's gone on longer than originally expected. The seditious conspiracy charge is not a common one, so a lot of technical legal issues came up. But this is a rejection by ordinary citizens in the form of a jury of their peers that these folks acted at the behest of Trump, the sitting president, to try to defend the U.S. It reinforces that they tried to act against the legitimate government of the U.S., and these verdicts show that the legitimate government prevails in terms of justice. End quote. And what I am saying now is that on a side note, it's interesting to note or remember now that this trial actually began on January 12th of 2023, which was the day that Mars stationed direct after his 2.5-month retrograde in Gemini, and as part of Mars' long 7-month journey through that sign. Okay, so part of what may continue to surprise us now, especially since we've got the debt ceiling crisis looming, is how this will end. I mean, my point in saying that is the recent jury verdict for the Proud Boys may not have surprised us, but it did culminate, okay? So, we now no longer have hidden whether or not those accused of seditious conspiracy will go to jail. They have been saying, I don't know, I didn't get all the details, but that it could be up to 50 years in jail. I wasn't quite sure if they were talking for each of them, but I wouldn't be surprised. In any case, as I was saying, part of what we may continue to be surprised about now may, in fact, involve the debt ceiling crisis. And since Pluto is archetypally representative of joint resources and other people's money, and Pluto is the ruler of this particular Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, it seems to me particularly fitting that satisfying debt would be an issue that's front and center right now. Now, I've already spoken in past weeks about the details of how raising the debt ceiling in Congress requires simply approving payment for monies already borrowed by our government, and that this has nothing to do with acquiring new debt. And how, if the U.S. defaults on its debt now, meaning past debts now, our economy stands a good chance of crashing, as per Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and in the expert opinion of many other financial experts. So that the GOP is holding the Democrats and President Biden hostage now, particularly also by spinning untrue stories or disinformation or misinformation about who's really been reluctant to negotiate, since it took McCarthy ages to put an actual plan on the table. And he, all along, has accused Biden of not wanting to negotiate, while at the same time not even presenting a specific plan or a detailed plan, even though the administration put forward its own plan ages ago. So again, the question becomes, will this May 5th Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, and I'll point out a little later that this is followed by, because the sun is approaching Uranus at this eclipse, but it will perfect that conjunction on May 9th. So we have a couple days between these two. But again, that this current eclipse is opposing the degree of last November's lunar eclipse, and also involves Uranus here. Are we getting ready for more shocks and surprises? And if so, concerning what exactly? But again, it seems that this debt ceiling crisis is the one that most easily and readily comes to mind. So I took a look at Joe Biden's chart, and this eclipse falls on his 12th house cusp, which is 13 degrees and 29 minutes of Scorpio, and also close to his natal Mars at 12 degrees 35 minutes Scorpio. And both of these points square his natal 9th house, 13 degree 31 Leo Hygeia, which is the goddess asteroid of health. And likewise, I spoke about this last week, this particular, I talked about the 2 degree Scorpio new moon lunar eclipse that occurred last October 25th, 2022, and mentioned that the transiting nodes haven't hit that degree yet. This is another sensitized degree. It's all eclipse degrees have become sensitized, right? So the transiting nodes are due to hit that 2 degree, because it was an exact 2 degree eclipse degree, it occurred at that exact degree. And that's going to happen circa June 23rd, give or take a day or two, of 2023. So given that that's less than 2 months from now, and will occur about a month before the transiting nodes regress, and remember, nodes regression is the nodal axis's normal movement, but this will, as I said, happen about a month before the nodes regress back into the south node in Libra and the north node in Aries axis, which will be here for about the next year and a half. And that happens in July. Hang on a second. I thought I had the degree. I think it's July 23rd. Hold on. Nope, my bad. I'm confusing myself, and I already said June 23rd. So I said what I meant, and I meant what I said. Sorry for the temporary confusion. So anyway, on June 23rd, give or take a few hours or a day, the transiting nodes will hit the sensitized 2 Scorp degree from last October. And I had pointed out the prominence of that degree as part of last week, in my last week's podcast, as part of Tucker Carlson's natal 10th house Saturn, which is at 2 degrees and 4 minutes of Taurus. So that eclipse was directly opposed to his natal Saturn from inside his 4th house. And I spoke also about how transiting Pluto, then at 1 degree and still 1 degree 21 minutes, stationed retrograde on May 1st in Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's 1st house, a degree away from his natal 1 degree. Let me check that. Hold on. Okay, thank God for the ephemeris, and I misspoke. Okay, so on May 1st, Pluto stationed retrograde at 0 degrees and 21 minutes of Aquarius. And at that time, it was 1 degree away from Clarence Thomas's 1st house, 1 degree 23 minute Aquarius moon. And I talked last week about it heading for his stellium in Cancer in his 6th house. But what I didn't say is that this 2 degree Scorpio eclipse from last October also opposed President Joe Biden's moon at 0 degrees and 58 minutes, or almost 1 degree Taurus from his 11th house. So let's look at how he's having trouble getting the legislature, and the 11th house represents the legislature in mundane astrology, to confirm his more liberal judges, in part since the vote of California Senator Dianne Feinstein, who's on the Senate Judiciary Committee, is needed to get these judges seated. Feinstein's been out for a while now, recovering from shingles, and though she already announced that at 89 years of age she's not running again in 2024, she's thus far refused to retire early and allow a new Senate appointment by California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom between now and the election in November 2024, the next presidential election. So to say that this has stymied Biden's efforts to match the rapid pace of conservative judge appointments by Congress during Trump's presidency, I think would be an understatement. But let's see what happens by June 23rd, okay? And now, since Venus will enter Cancer on May 7th and Mars is still transiting through moon-ruled Cancer, I think we'll see more attention to the plight of children related both to gun violence and also, more currently, to their plight if the GOP manages to wrestle budget cuts to health care and food supplemental programs, which clearly affect both low-income children and adults, as part of this debt ceiling financial negotiation. Now, I'm imagining that with both Venus and Mars in more sensitive, compassionate, nurturing, moon-ruled Cancer, that any changes to this kind of funding will be strongly resisted by someone like Biden, who's, look at his story. He's already lost two children, one when he was much younger and one who was an infant or a toddler in the past, and another as an adult due to cancer, and whose 5th house Taurus moon would want everyone to be well fed and cared for physically, especially children. 5th house rules children. So this issue may become a bit more complicated because just after Venus enters Cancer on May 7th, and Venus, of course, is the planet of beauty, creativity, and harmony, she'll quincunx Pluto retrograde in Aquarius. Now, this 150-degree aspect between the two calls for some kind of adjustment. Read and review, a review of what can be adjusted now because Pluto's retrograde. So we want to make an adjustment between the big picture evolutionary progress and survival, as represented by Pluto in Aquarius, something, again, we're reviewing, and the stability, peace, and harmony, especially of Venus, especially around children and families, which is Cancer, the sign she's going to be traveling through. So this quincunx may well tell us that if Pluto's long-term concern is how far into the future can we look and plan for evolutionary progress to be made, Venus's immediate on-the-ground concern may be better served through concessions so she can live to fight another day and not risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Of course, this cautionary advice goes for both sides. And what I'm saying is that it seems as though the GOP and Kevin McCarthy's chickens may be coming home to roost now as we experience today's, May 5th's lunar eclipse, opposite to the one that gave him his speakership, but by far a much smaller margin, or speakership by a much smaller margin than he had originally anticipated. So when we look at Kevin McCarthy's chart, and he was born January 26, 1965 at 12:40 p.m. in Bakersfield, California, we see that last November 8th, 1601 Taurus lunar eclipse fell directly on his 12th house, 16-degree, 33-minute Jupiter in Taurus. His natal Jupiter also trines his 5th house, Virgo, Uranus, Pluto conjunction, indicating that he was born during that momentous conjunction in January 1965, and his natal Jupiter also opposes his natal 6th house, 19-degree, 50-minute Neptune in Scorpio. Now, Jupiter opposite Neptune can prove to be highly unrealistic in nature, or as Rob Hand says in his Planets in Transit book, it can make it, quote, difficult to keep the real and the ideal sorted out. It can also, according to Hand, tempt one to, and again I quote, become involved in unrealistic schemes that you can only believe if blinded by extreme optimism. And he continues, you want to gamble and take risks with your resources, and if you're not careful, wild speculations and gambling could leave you bankrupt. However, Hand goes on to point out that there are the rare few with this aspect who may actually become professional gamblers in the sense that they, quote, have a talent for calculating risk and therefore handle the gambling aspects of this energy very well because they make seemingly wild investments pan out. So which one it will prove to be as we approach the June 1st U.S. debt default date remains to be seen. Does McCarthy have a good enough poker face to prevail? Today's lunar eclipse falls near his 12th house Jupiter, near his 12th house Neptune, activating his natal opposition to Jupiter, and also squares his Pisces 11th house cusp at 14 degrees and 10 minutes of Scorpio, and, not Scorpio, Pisces, and his natal 15 degree 54 11th house Chiron in Pisces, and those oppose his natal Uranus, Pluto in Virgo in his 5th house, also the house of children again. So does he really want to gamble with children's lives here? Well, I mean, he's already tried that, as part of the GOP with seniors' lives, right? Given the fact that Joe Biden kind of out-manipulated the GOP at his State of the Union address back in, I don't remember, it was January or February now, or even early March, but that he got them all to, voice their opposition to using the debt ceiling argument or fight as a reason to allow the Republicans to cut back Social Security or veterans benefits and others, other things like that. But now we have to see whether McCarthy is really serious about cutting programs that will affect the lives of children. Well, again, he's also certainly proven capable of that in terms of the gun regulation issue, right? He dodged the issue with ABC News on March 30th after the school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee, when he refused to say, following this tragic mass shooting in Nashville, that the House would consider an assault weapons ban when he was asked about the calls for reform, setting up a familiar showdown between President Joe Biden and Republicans in Congress. And if we remember, that was what resulted in the expulsion of the 2 members of the Tennessee legislature, thus making impotent the power of those who elected those 2 representatives, but that, of course, they are now back in the legislature. And we also have the recent issue of, I think it was Montana, following suit by, it looks like the court has upheld a permanent ban for the rest of the legislative session on the transgender representative. I'm sorry, her name, Zoe something, I think, the name escapes me right now, from attending any of the legislative sessions because she spoke out about the transgender ban that the right-wing portion of the legislature did go ahead and pass. So it's going to be interesting to see whether Mars and Venus traveling through the same sign of family and children, which, represents nurturing through life-sustaining food, which is a Cancer-related archetype, will result in a compromise, especially as Venus seeks that adjustment to funding through her quincunx to Pluto following her entrance into Cancer on May 7. So as of this recording, which again is admittedly being made the day before the podcast drops, reports are that both sides, the GOP led by Kevin McCarthy and the Democratic administration led by President Biden, are inching now toward a compromise that could be spun as a win for both sides. I don't have the details on that. They'll be coming clear by tomorrow or later tonight. But we may or may not see the culmination of any sudden shocks or surprises that occur at this lunar eclipse, if they haven't occurred already, meaning that we are still waiting for the sun to actually conjoin exactly with Uranus on May 9th. But given the similarity of the two eclipses I mentioned that both have Uranus and Taurus involved in them, we'll see if there's going to be change on both sides. But again, if we remember that last year's November 8th lunar eclipse saw the Taurus moon Uranus conjunction opposed to the Scorpio sun and Mercury and Venus, we experienced an evolutionary change that helped balance or integrate the two opposing sides, as the Taurus moon Uranus reminded the Scorpio sun and the others that it can change, but that it will do so only to accomplish better harmonious balance rather than greater imbalance. And now with the May 5th Scorpio lunar eclipse emphasizing the opposite, the Scorpio moon is highlighting that remaining stubbornly stuck in the past won't serve us for the future, especially because universal law says that the only constant is change. Now it's interesting to note too that the day before the exact eclipse, which is May 4th, the Biden administration announced it's sending 1,500 unarmed troops to El Paso, Texas, to help deal with the influx of migrants coming across the border. And I mention it not necessarily because it's that related to the current aspects, but I'm thinking of it in terms of the Venus joining Mars in Cancer soon. And I heard one of the community leaders in El Paso make comments to a news reporter about how what they need there is not really service members, but social workers and lawyers and perhaps, psychologists or other therapists to help these individuals and families figure out how to proceed, especially since it was noted that many of them are attempting to emigrate from their home countries based on information they've been given there or along the way that may not be completely accurate. So to segue a bit now and go back to Pluto's connection at this Pluto-Ruled Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse, Clarence Thomas seems to continue to be under the gun yet again with the recent revelation, which occurred May 4th, that another rich person also funded his... Well, hang on, because I've got two different things here. It says that... Oh, this is about Harlan Crow, I think. Hold on a second. Let me clarify this. Okay, let's start that again. So Clarence Thomas continues to be under the gun with the recent revelation that was printed in the New York Times on May 4th, and I quote, "A Republican donor from Texas paid for 2 years of private school tuition for Justice Clarence Thomas's great-nephew, a gift that the justice did not disclose, a friend of the justice acknowledged in a statement on Thursday," which is today, May 4th. The acknowledgement added detail to a report on Thursday by ProPublica, which last month documented how Justice Thomas had received gifts of luxury travel from the billionaire donor Harlan Crow. The revelations, which also include the sale of the home of Justice Thomas's mother to Mr. Crow, have raised questions over the justice's ethical practices. And here comes the part that makes me want to laugh incessantly. And again, quote from the Times. In his statement, Mark Paoletta, Justice Thomas's friend and a former official for the Trump administration, argued that the justice was not required to report the tuition. He pointed to part of a 1978 law that says judges must disclose gifts to dependent children, who are defined as, quote, a son, daughter, stepson, or stepdaughter. Mr. Paoletta stressed that by measure, a great-nephew does not qualify, end quote. Now, oh my God, come on. You gotta laugh at that Virgoan distinction here, no? I mean, good try, buddy, but seriously? How about we focus on the law's intent or the rule's intent rather than on its semantics? And I have a son in law school, a second year in law school at Georgetown, and I learned, because I'm so interested in it and I talk to him all the time about stuff, I really, really have come to see, when we talk about the Aquarian Uranian archetype in astrology and its ability to be objective, but also ideological because it's so fixed. It's so interesting to me how it's like they say the knife, the law cuts like a knife, right? There's a blade here. And it's just that kind of, it's like a scalpel, right? Like discerning the difference between dependent children defined as a son, daughter, stepson, or stepdaughter, and that of another relative who's technically a great nephew is just insane to me. But I'm learning that more and more this kind of semantics is what leads some of those who are strictly by the letter to rule in certain ways. And I think I guess I would make an Aquarian statement and say, that's so interesting. But whether interesting translates into positive or negative depends on your point of view. All right. Anyway, meanwhile, as we approach, again, Venus's entrance into Cancer on May 7th, I noted, too, that oral argument began yesterday, which is today, May 4th, in a lawsuit over a Wisconsin abortion ban, where, according to Wisconsin Public Radio, which is a division of NPR, National Public Radio, quote, Attorney General Josh Kaul is trying to block enforcement of a pre-Civil War law that bans most abortions in the state. This week's hearing in Dane County Circuit Court comes as a Republican prosecutor seeks to dismiss a lawsuit that aims to restore abortion rights in Wisconsin. Democrat Attorney General, the same guy, Josh Kaul, filed the lawsuit last summer, just days after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. The U.S. Supreme Court's ruling reinstated Wisconsin's ban on all abortions except those done to save a pregnant person's life. Kaul argues the 19th century abortion law shouldn't be enforced because it conflicts with newer state abortion laws. That includes a less restrictive law from 1985, which criminalizes providing an abortion only if it's done after the point of fetal viability. So in his motion to dismiss the suit, Sheboygan County District Attorney Joel Urmansky rejected the notion that Wisconsin's abortion laws are in conflict with each other, as you see another conflict, right? We see Scorpio versus Taurus. I'll let you free associate with that one in terms of relating it to this particular issue, as well as, Pluto, life or death, right? And Taurus, the body, and the bodily autonomy, as I said, the feminine divine. But anyway, this guy is rejecting the notion that Wisconsin's abortion laws are in conflict with each other, as well as the Attorney General's assertion that Wisconsin's 1849 law is unconstitutionally vague. Again, we're back to what I was saying about the Aquarian objectivity of the law, right? Which relates also to the fact that so many conservatives on the Supreme Court are what is known as, what do they call it? They interpret the Constitution literally. Urmansky, a Republican, has said previously he would enforce Wisconsin's abortion ban, end quote. Now, I also am thinking of, again, and I mentioned this last week, Trump's rape trial, bringing into the collective's conscious awareness as this trial has proceeded, and since last week, E. Jean Carroll has been on the stand and has been grilled by Trump's lawyer, Joe Tacopino. But it's been pointed out that, the way that Tacopino has questioned her from a male point of view is that, why didn't you scream, right? And she points out, as have other witnesses, that rape victims are not all the same. They don't act the same way, and that many women of her age range, if not even younger, have been socialized not to do things like scream. So, again, this trial, probably because it involves someone so well known as Trump, is more on the public radar than any other rape trials might be. But this highlights at this eclipse as well that those of the feminine divine energy have been subjected to the patriarchal view of them for centuries, if not millennium, and how this is not only now being highlighted, but hopefully exposed in a different way, something that really started when Chiron entered Aries in the spring of 2017 at the beginning of the Me Too movement, and that when Venus entered Taurus in the spring of 2018, approximately a year later, it has led over this time to a large change in social mores, particularly around these issues around women and not only abortion, obviously, but sexual harassment and rape. Now, Tacopino, as anyone who's seen him on TV can figure out or has read about his questioning of E. Jean Carroll, is old school male. And I heard one political pundit say that Trump probably erred in picking a male defense counsel and that a woman would have better helped his case against Carroll to be more effective. So remember, Chiron in Aries is speaking out against old wounds, Uranus and Taurus, trauma around the body. So together, we might look at this as representing, even if only as one small part of these archetypal energy interpretations, in combination, as speaking out about trauma to the body, in this case through sexual harassment, assault, and rape. And this, of course, especially in this day and age, includes also not only sexual harassment of females, but also of males who've been sexually assaulted or raped, whether that occurred at the hand of females or males. I just want to be all-inclusive here, but, the topic is not something that anyone would want to be included in. But I would add also that even though perhaps Roe versus Wade was definitely on the radar of the Federalist Society and the conservative legal movement that far back when Chiron entered Aries and Uranus entered Taurus, but it didn't come to light until the past year or so. I wanted to share now something written on Facebook that I cut and pasted by Lynn Coiner, who is a very well-known astrologer. She was the head of the NCGR chapter in Annapolis, Maryland for, I think, the last 16 years. She's also a modern medical astrologer. She was on my show a few years ago, once or twice. She is not a traditional medical astrologer, which is the standard for the astrologers who basically follow William Lilly's writings about, if you become sick, you draw up a decumbiture chart, which is for the moment you take to your bed, and then look at the chances for the progression of a disease or the cure of a disease or whatever, etc. She has much more modern interpretations. So if you're not familiar with Lynn, it's Lynn Coiner, Koiner. She's on Facebook. She has a medical astrology page and a personal page, and she used to moderate. I don't know if she still does the NCGR Annapolis page, but check them out. But I want to read something that she wrote. So here goes, and this is a quote. Transiting Pluto at 27 to 29 degrees is a great ending cycle. And she mentions part of my forthcoming book on beginning and ending planets is on my website. This marks a cycle for letting go of the past, cutting the cord, shutting the door, and moving on. If you start something new with Pluto at the ending degrees, the new will only be a stepping stone to something else. Sometimes we need transitions. Personally, I've had so many losses. Now, Lynn is is elderly. Loss of friends, the passing of friends, ending the office of president, meaning the NCGR Annapolis, after 16 years, and being aware of everything that is gone in my life. Pluto at 0 degrees, which is where Pluto is now, is what I call the inchoate inchoate degree. You sense that something new is afoot, but you're not sure what the new direction is going to be until January 2025, after which Pluto is not going to return to Capricorn, at least during any of our lifetimes. And she says it does hit 1 degree Aquarius in the spring of 2024, but there is still some finishing up and letting go to be done. Again, the new may be transitional. At the 0 to 1 degree, now remember, Pluto is retrograding back and forth. It's retrograde in Aquarius now, goes back into Capricorn June 11th. It'll go back into Aquarius, I think not until January of 2024, once it stations direct. Pluto usually has about a 5.5 month retrograde period. So if it went May 1st, you can just do the calculation. About 5.5 months later, it's going to station direct. And then after that, it has to, so it's going to retrograde back to between what she started this with, the 29 to 27 degree Capricorn, and so on. So if you have planets in those degrees, you're going to get re-hit by Pluto. And then, of course, to go back to 0 degrees of Aquarius and further into Aquarius and then retrograde again. So she says at 0 to 1 degrees of Aquarius in 2024, it's time to make lists of the new changes that you want to make, especially since Aquarius is an air sign in terms of communication. And Lynn has already mentioned here that she's writing and wants to publish a book. Now, she goes on to say that Pluto turns retrograde from May 1st through October 10th or 11th of 2023. That's right now. And in the natal chart, she says, Pluto tends to operate even more Plutonian when it is retrograde. It is far more intense, it possesses a higher degree of concentration, and it therefore gives greater insights into the subconscious. Because of this intensity, the individual can see much more than normally possible, and it's easy to become suspicious of the motives of others. The powers of regeneration are far greater when retrograde. Now, Pluto and Scorpio are known to have great powers of regeneration, but she's saying they're even more enhanced during the retrograde period, which is something actually I never heard of before, but it makes sense. People with a natural retrograde Pluto, and actually that's my son, my SON, have a tremendous ability to overcome major illnesses that might otherwise cause permanent disability. Now, thank God, knock on wood, my son has never had a major illness diagnosis, but I do recall that when young, he really rebounded from, minor illnesses like a flu or whatever, and I know he fractured his foot at one time and was told 3 weeks before he had to go, he was enrolled to go to skateboarding camp when he was 13 for a week. The doctor said, oh, there's no way you're going to go. You're not going to be healed by then. Well, my son got so pissed off that at such a potential restriction that he vowed to be able to go. And 2 days before, when his dad took him back for his checkup, the doctor said, yeah, you're healed. You can go. And he was like, my son, 13, right? Damn straight, Anyway, I'm my little rebel, but that's another story. So, remember, retrograde motion, I'm going back to quoting Lynn, is always directed toward inner activity, such as the psyche or psychological patterns that affect the physical body. Direct motion, on the other hand, is directed toward external circumstances. But I'll also say, or add, something that I've already said, which is that Pluto is about empowerment. So I believe that when Pluto is retrograde, we're bringing from our unconscious into our consciousness the fact or the knowledge that we can be more powerful or more self-empowered. We have to excavate from our unconscious when Pluto is retrograde what it is we're afraid of, right? And in this case, because Uranus represents change, and because Taurus and Scorpio are in opposition at this eclipse, these archetypes, we have to look at where change frightens us. Now I go back to what Lynn says. Under any Pluto transit, we feel pressured to eliminate and release the old, outworn, outdated, and obsolete in our lives. When Pluto is transiting retrograde, we are urged to let go of attitudes, thinking, or communication patterns, security drives, rigid emotions, and it's a time to undergo an internal form of house cleaning, which is a bit of another way of saying what I meant about excavating from the unconscious. That's cleaning house, right? And bringing it into consciousness so it can no longer present an obstacle for us or cause us to be afraid. And Lynn goes on, it's a good time to research into our own souls in order to determine exactly what we do or do not need. Now, I think that's also echoed by Uranus's transit through Taurus right now, because Uranus asks us to change our values. And in order to do so, we have to say, well, what is it that we valued then? And what is it that we value now? And what's the difference between the two? And because Venus's Taurus is particularly related to the physical world, our bodies are involved, but also she represents relationships in general, being Venus ruled. So, what is it that we thought that we needed in our relationships that may have been embedded deep in our psychological unconscious portion of our psyches, that makes us afraid not to become more empowered in relationships? And how can we excavate that knowledge, bring it up into our conscious ego brains, and then make the changes that are necessary? But again, Lynn goes on to say, because Pluto retrograde imparts an intense power for investigation, we should use this time to assess what recurring patterns in our lives make us feel out of control. Where and why do we continually give our power away? And under what circumstances do we react so defensively that we elicit attacks from others? Pluto retrograde marks a time wherein we should seek to gain greater control over our personal life. Pluto direct is better for gaining control over professional and financial areas. Yet again, obviously Pluto is retrograde and Mercury is still there, in terms of this financial debt ceiling quandary or whatever, argument or, oppositional energies. Lynn goes on to say, my most frequent observation of Pluto retrograde is that many people do seek some form of regenerative activity. I have seen people undertake a series of internal cleansings, detoxifying diets, Eastern disciplines that put them in touch with the inner self, and even intense psychological reforms. So I'm just going to finish up now by reading some of what I already wrote in my Facebook post and my newsletter, my most recent newsletter. So, do we resist change or do we embrace it? And do we realize that if we keep attempting to do the same thing over and over and yet expect different results, that this is, maybe a little bit crazy? And again, this question is doubly emphasized with Pluto's current retrograde, because it helps us review where transformative change is absolutely necessary for greater self-empowerment, and the fact that that Pluto rules this current eclipse. So can we use any revelations that arise now to help us achieve positive future change in terms of our sense of personal and collective power? Again, I said this before, change is the only constant. It's the universal law against stagnation and stasis, and without it, we cannot evolve. So as the Taurus sun approaches its exact conjunction to Uranus on May 9th, our inner drive for outer change may culminate by then. We may feel restless and excited about breaking free from either inner or outer imposed restrictions, but without the conscious recognition that change is inevitable, we may feel shocked at any disruption to our normal routine between now and then. So the less we recognize the universal call for change now, the more likely we'll be to find any sudden change upsetting. And that's both, personally and within the collective. So my advice is that it's best to go with the flow and embrace any unexpected changes now, with the understanding that there's always a reason for such change, and that this reason will come clear, if not immediately, then definitely down the line. We know the Taurus sun does not usually embrace change willingly. We know also that Venus-ruled Taurus archetypal energy boils down to this simple basic question: what's of greatest value to us in our lives right now? So I mentioned that Uranus has been transiting through Taurus since the spring of 2018, and we've been given ample opportunity to recognize what's caused us to change our previous set of values, whether we were initially happy about that or not. Such changes have been most prevalent in areas of import to most of us human beings as related to the Venus archetype. Relationships, I'm thinking about the pandemic, right? Relationships, finances, careers, jobs, our physical resources, including our homes and our living arrangements, and the health of our bodies. And with Mercury currently retrograding through Taurus until May 14th, we'll continue reviewing the situation, as the character Fagin from the musical Oliver liked to say. Now, by next week, by the May 12th waning third quarter monthly lunar square of the Aquarius moon to the Taurus sun, which follows the Aquarius moon square to Uranus in Taurus just a few hours before, we may or may not see some follow-ups to the Sun-Uranus conjunction from May 9th. In other words, more information coming to the forefront. My guess would be about this debt ceiling business, at least for those who care, because we're in the U.S. Now, since Mercury retrograde in Taurus sextiles both Saturn in Pisces and Venus in Cancer that day too, we have the opportunity to see things through a more critical eye and make necessary changes or corrections, especially around emotions related to our relationships now. And Venus's watery trine to Saturn in Pisces May 12th or 13th, depending on your time zone, will help us to stay focused on practical matters. Concentration proves good, including for detailed problem solving, because we can work carefully and diligently now. So in fact, this may prove to be a good time during which some budget ceiling compromise is actually worked out in time for it to be announced at or following Mercury's station direct in Taurus on May 24th. All right, guys, so that's it for this week. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on May 12th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.